Tehan, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you, David.
So, in all honesty, was this result in Dunkley good enough for the Liberals?
It was a very good result for the Liberal Party. We've seen a swing of about 3.75%, which in a first term of a government, the average is about 1.5%. For by-elections normally, it's about 3.5%. So this was a very good win. We had a great local candidate. We campaigned well. And I must say the feeling last night, especially for the Victorian Liberal Party, was that we're back and we'll be able to make it very, very competitive here in Victoria at the next federal election. And obviously nationally, if we could get a swing of 3.75% at the next general election, that puts Anthony Albanese in the Labor government into minority government, or possibly could put us back in power. So I think overall it was a very, very good outcome for the Liberal Party.
But the Labor primary vote didn't budge, despite everything you threw at them over cost of living, the so-called ute tax, immigration detainees. Why do you think Labor's vote held up?
Well, it's very interesting. There's a couple of things here. The Labor primary vote didn't budge, but there's two considerations. First of all, you've got to remember the Labor primary vote at the last election was the lowest since the Depression. So they are at an incredibly low base. So I don't think they can.
Dunkley, though.
But it went up marginally in Dunkley. And the second point, David, is that the Greens were completely absent in Dunkley yesterday. So what you've seen is the Green vote go down. Now, some of that has naturally flowed to Labor because Labor and the Greens, obviously, their voters work hand in glove with each other. So really, when you look at it in terms of Labor's primary vote, if I was Anthony Albanese, I'd be very concerned because it's coming off an incredibly low base anyway. The Greens tanked, they weren't out there campaigning, and it's lifted marginally. So there's not a lot there for Labor to crow about, and I think Anthony Albanese has been sent a real message.
But aren't you at all worried that we could be at the height of the cost of living problem here? We've had 13 interest rate rises. Things might get better for the government from here. Couldn't you have done better in these circumstances?
Well, I think we did do very well. We have been focused on cost of living and highlighting that that's what the government's focus should be. It's the Labor Party that hasn't been. $460 million on the Voice campaign last year. It seems to have, it was really only once we got to Christmas that the Labor government and Anthony Albanese finally sort of understood that there was a cost of living crisis, and we're not seeing anything that the Labor Party are doing which is going to have a material difference at this stage when it comes to dealing with people's cost of living pressures. So,
and yet voters have still backed them. They've won this by-election. You haven't.
Well, yes, I mean, look, you've got to remember a couple of things as well. Peter Murphy, who right across the parliament was widely regarded as a very, very decent person, someone who represented her electorate very well. So it was very, very sad and tragic circumstances that we had that by-election, and that feeling was still there on the ground. So you had that, but also you've had a 3.75% swing against the government. Now, that is sending Anthony Albanese a message. And if he doesn't think that, and he still wants to go to Katy Perry and Taylor Swift concerts and wants to continue to travel overseas constantly, get his Republic minister to start laying the groundwork for a Republic referendum, well, then he can go for it.
Isn't there a message?
It won't worry us.
Isn't there a pretty simple message for the Liberals here too? You need to win seats in Victoria, and you're still not.
Well, of course we need to win seats in Victoria, but I can tell you on that result, where when it comes to Dunkley at the general election, when it comes to McEwen at the general election, when it comes to Aston at the general election, we are riding with a chance, and that'll be our focus.
How does that tell you that you're going to win the seat next time?
Well, because if we can keep taking the attack up to the government, keep unified like we are, roll out policies between now and the next general election, we will be very, very competitive.
Well, just on that, do you need now to start releasing more policy alternatives?
Of course, and that's what we will do. And I'll quote the Prime Minister's words ahead of the last election. And there's not a lot that he says that I'd agree with, but there is one thing, and that is when it comes to elections, you've got to be kicking with the wind in the last quarter, and that's what we'll be doing in terms of rolling out policies. We've obviously got a budget coming up in May. We've got to see what sort of mess they make with that, and then we've got to put our plans in place. And we know we've got to do that, and we've been doing that work. We've been working incredibly hard, and we've been staying unified. And for a first-term opposition, that's what you need to be doing to be competitive at the next election.
And I'll come back to that, but what about this argument over whether going for the outer suburbs is the best strategy, or should you be doing more to try and win back those teal seats? What do you think?
Well, the strategy has always been to win enough seats to form government. That's what you need to be doing, and that's what our strategy is. And
but are you going to rethink the idea that the teals don't matter so much at this election?
Well, we've always had the view that every seat is important, and we saw in 2022 that there were seats that were lost, there were seats that were won, that, you look at now and you'd say, oh, well, no one was predicting that would be the outcome. So we will be focusing everywhere we can to win seats, whether that be in the teal seats or whether that be in the outer suburbs and the regions. And our policies will be directed at doing that. I mean,
so what have you done about the teal seats? Is there anything you've done to appeal to those lost voters?
Absolutely. They're feeling the cost of living pressures like anyone else is. The cost of living pressures are being felt right across the nation. And so as we develop policies, they will understand that we are providing a real alternative. If you look at those 13
when are we going to see those policies, though?
Well, you'll see them as in the lead up to the election. As I've said, David, we've got to understand where the government has got us at. And if you look at those teal seats, the pressures on interest rates, because obviously anyone who has bought a house in any of those seats, they are feeling those 13 interest rate rises that you mentioned earlier. So there's plenty for us to be able to do when it comes to the teal seats, when it comes to these outer suburban seats, and that will be the focus. And as we roll out our policies towards the next election, you will see that focus. We want to form government at the next election, and that is our aim.
Let me ask you about some of your policy positions, at least in the broad, in your own immigration portfolio. What should Australia's migration intake be?
Well, I can tell you what it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be as high as what it is today.
So what should it be?
Well, obviously we've got to wait and see, and we will announce that in the lead up to the next election. We've got to wait and see what it is under this government, so then we can work out, OK, what we need to do. But I can tell you what's too high. 1.6 million people coming into this country over 4 years. To give your viewers an idea of that, that is the population of the City of Adelaide. When we have a housing crisis, when we have a rental crisis, when people can't get in to see a doctor, when we're seeing cuts in our infrastructure, so the roads aren't being built to deal with that population, that is too high. I went to the press club not long after the last election and said that what we need is a proper plan when it comes to immigration, and set out what that should look like.
So
now, what we've seen from Labor is a complete mess when it comes to immigration, whether it be dealing with the detainees, whether it be this 1.6 million people coming in without a plan. It's a complete mess.
So just sticking that, if 1.6 million over 4 years is too many, what is appropriate?
Oh, well, we will announce all that in the lead up to the next election. Obviously,
but
the Labor government...
How can you say 1.6 million's too many? If you look, is 1.5 million okay?
No, look, I said to you 1.5 isn't okay, but we will
1.4,
announce all this. Oh, you're not going to get my immigration policy announced to you today, but I can tell your viewers we view it as too high, and I can tell you we will announce our immigration policy ahead of the next election.
Because Peter Dutton only 18 months ago said we do need an increase in the migration numbers. So you're now saying it needs to decrease.
Well, no one thought that the Labor Party would say that 1.6 million people without a plan should be coming into this country over the next 4 years. That is the size of the city of Adelaide.
Well, a lot of
They're
this is
cutting
driven
infrastructure spending.
A lot of this is driven by the international student intake, and it was only a couple of years ago that you, as Trade Minister, were announcing a strategy for international education. You said it would support the rapid return of international students when borders open again. Did you misjudge that one?
No, because we'd been through COVID. The borders had been closed. Of course, we wanted international students
back. A rapid return of students.
Because we didn't have any. We didn't have any, but no one thought that we would get the numbers, over 1 million in 1 year coming back, that we've seen. And this is the problem. As I set out in the press club when I became the Shadow Immigration Minister, you've got to have a plan. There is no plan whatsoever. All they did was say, we're going to let in as many as we possibly can. Now they're rushing and panicking, trying to shut down and hose down the amount that are coming in. So that's not a plan, that's a mess.
How many students should we take in? And did you ever have an idea as Minister what the number should be, or were you just opening up the doors and seeing what happened?
No, not at all. We had a very good idea as to what we wanted to see, and what we wanted to make sure in particular that it was planned, that it was done appropriately, and that you get it back to levels which are sustainable. And, you know, understanding that you have to be able to deal with housing, understand you have to be able to deal with rents. Now, rental vacancies at the moment are at their lowest levels ever. It's driving up rents. That's adding to inflation. I mean, Labor Party have made a mess of immigration.
So will you reduce that intake of foreign students?
What the intake of foreign students does need to be reduced, absolutely.
To what?
That's what the government is trying to do. Well, we've got to wait and see. Obviously, there's a lot of conditions that you've got to look at. There's a lot of policies that the Labor Party have now, in a very knee-jerk reaction, put in place. We've got to see what happens there. But, David, I guarantee you, one thing I can guarantee your viewers, there'll be an immigration policy that will be announced before the next election, and it will be very different to Labor's immigration policy.
And do you want a bigger or a smaller population?
What I've said is we don't want Labor's big Australia. Labor are pursuing a big Australia.
So you want a smaller population?
What we want is a better Australia, and we will announce what our better Australia will look like in the lead up to the next election.
You can tell me whether you want a bigger or a smaller Australia.
Well, what I can tell you is immigration is too high in this nation. 1.6 million over 4 years is too high, and there is no plan to what's occurring with immigration. We think that that number is far too high, and we will announce our policy in the lead up to the next election.
OK, let's turn just quickly to the former immigration detainees released after the High Court ruling last year. Peter Dutton says if you were in government, they'd all be behind bars. How exactly would you have kept them locked up?
Well, we wouldn't have led to the situation where the High Court has made the ruling that it did. And there are a number of things...
How would you have stopped the High Court making a ruling?
Well, because to start with, the agreed statement of facts last May that the government agreed to, we very much might have had a very different approach to that agreed statement of facts, which led to the High Court making its decision. There were 3 very important discussions with the legal counsel in the Department of Home Affairs, where the Minister for Immigration didn't even bother to turn up to. And one of them, he was at a Voice rally earlier that morning in Canberra. Parliament was sitting, and then he didn't turn up.
You reckon that would have changed the High Court's decision?
Well, you never know what your legal case that you put...
Well, we are where we are. So what would you do? What would you do now? Can you lock them back up?
Well, we put a preventative detention regime in place. Now, has that preventative detention regime been used? No, it hasn't. And we know that there are 37 sex offenders, including child sex offenders, 7 murderers out in the community, and yet no preventative detention order has been used to keep the community additionally safe.
Is that regime tough enough?
Well, let's wait and see. I mean, we haven't seen the government...
Does it need to be stronger?
Well, if it needs to be stronger if the government can't use it, and we would work with the government to make it stronger, but they haven't used it. The hopeless and hapless immigration minister, having got us in this situation, won't even use the preventative detention order. And that's, I mean, the Australian community are worried. 7 murderers, 37 sex offenders, and he hasn't even used it. And the sad reality is, and we know this from the data, that there will be reoffending. So they need to be acting and acting quickly.
But can you lock them all back up?
Well, what you can do is you can use the preventative detention order that the government put in place with the support of the opposition. As a matter of fact, we basically led them to do it because they were floundering, and now we want them to use it, and they need to be using it. They've got legal counsel, they've got a legal section which probably is 300-400 people. What are they all doing? Let's see them get to work. I mean, we had that situation last week where, you know, the Victorian Police thought one of them had reoffended. Now, that should be a wake-up call to Andrew Giles to get going and get moving on this.
Yeah, well, Victorian Police were wrong. They apologised for wrongly charging that man. You weren't there in Parliament on the day, but was that a bit embarrassing for your colleagues who ripped into the government over a wrongful arrest?
Not at all. I mean, the facts were the facts at that time, and it's a warning to the government that sadly, and none of us hope for this. None of us hope for this, and that's why we want the government to take action. But it is likely we're going to see reoffending unless they're keeping the community safe.
But on the specifics, do you need to be a bit more careful when matters are still before the court, just in case police have got the wrong guy?
Well, I mean, Victoria Police had arrested this person. They'd come out and they'd made a statement. I think we were perfectly entitled to go after the government. And as I said, this should act as a warning to the government that they need to be acting far more quickly than what they are to keep the community safe.
Shadow Immigration Minister Dan Tehan, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.